This is the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we're with Josh Bossé to consider the implications of the story of the Tabernacle in our own pursuits of God. And today we're not going to have a particular text that we're looking at outside of just the general story of the Tabernacle. It's somewhat of a continuation of what we covered in our last episode. But today's more of a study of spiritual practices, and we're going to have a presentation to go along with that. But yeah, this is about this is a more practical episode for us today, Marty.
Yeah, last week we talked about the Tabernacle, and we talked about the Tabernacle within the story, which is our typical approach. But this is going to be kind of like, wait a minute, let's take this story, let's step back, let's hold it another way. Let's look at the story another direction, a little different tone than usual, but one that's just so critical. I mean, the reason this lesson shows up here like this is because when we first started Bema, before this was a podcast, we were talking to college students in a study on college campus. And part of what I was trying to do was not create a podcast. I was trying to disciple college students. And part of the things I'm trying to do at the very beginning of their journey is teach them how to engage in spiritual practices. And so this was, and I, even though this is a podcast today, I still love stopping 24 episodes into our journey at the beginning and saying, if we don't do this, we're going to miss a huge opportunity for any of our listeners to know what it is to engage in spiritual practices and create a space. And so that's what we're doing. Last week, we talked about how the Tabernacle was like a mobile Genesis 1, 2, and 3, like a mobile garden. Like the Tabernacle takes them back to the Garden of Eden, takes them back to the creation story and the story of Adam and Eve. It's a mobile invitation to trust the story. And I can remember when I heard this, there's a video, by the way, there's a video of Ray Vanderlaan. It's a lesson called Creating a Space, and we'll link to that volume in the show notes so that you can watch it yourself. But I heard this lesson twice in person with Ray, and I can remember the first time I heard it. I remember Ray speaking very passionately, and he said, it's almost as if the first time in creation, God created the space, and he said, you fill it. And we kind of know how that worked. That didn't really work out all that well. Like the stories of us being fruitful and multiplying are kind of stories of us screwing up the story in a lot of ways, not trusting, kind of making a mess. And so this time it's almost as if God, the rabbis say, Ray said, it's almost like God says, you create the space and I'll fill it. And so I've always heard the story of the Tabernacle to be a metaphor and a picture of a promise, in a sense, that if we'll be willing to create a space, if we will create space for God, God will fill that space. He may not fill it the way we want him to. He may not fill it when we want him to. He may not fill it the way we anticipate him filling it. But if we create space for God, God will fill it. If we're not willing to create space for God, why would God shout through all the noise? Why would God shout through all of our busyness, all of our distraction, if we're not going to take any time, any space in our life to create space to be with God, to listen for his voice, to follow him? Why do we think, and luckily, by the grace of God, he does, but just as a relational point, why would we expect him to do that? So, Josh, anything you'd add to that before we get started?
I would take that last thing you said and to put a finer point on it, instead of it being like, do we deserve for God to try and shout through the noise? It's just like if that was happening between you and your friend, we would just acknowledge like that's not a good relationship. Like
right.
that isn't a relationship. You
right.
know, if I've just got my earbuds in and my wife is trying to talk to me, I'm just like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, doing my thing here. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Like that's a sign of a deeper problem. And man, gosh, all this stuff is so massively important for me.
Josh, you better stop talking before I feel any more convicted than I already
am. Well, I was about to share a happy piece of fun information because the Mishkan itself, the Tabernacle, is very important to me. And a big part of it was hearing this lesson of the kind of God created a space for us, which, as time goes on and y'all get to know my wheelhouse, like Genesis 1 is so huge for me. It's on my thoughts constantly. And to frame that as like, this is God creating a space for us and showing us how to create that space and then letting us flourish inside of it. And then the transition to now we're doing the same thing and God's flipping the roles. Like there's just something so perfect and fundamental about that it really captured my heart to the point where like literally my firstborn son is named Ronan because that is the first time that word is used in the Hebrew Bible. It's a word for a joyful shout. And it is what the previous episode is named after, people falling on joyful faces, seeing God's presence in this space. And it is massively important, especially with all the cultural stuff going on around us. And especially when I think of Jesus's words when he's talking to the woman at the well of like, yeah, right now everyone's all caught up on, do we worship at the temple? Do we worship here? So much is tied up in the temple, and him just saying, there's going to come a time and not too long where you're going to worship in spirit and in truth. And to me, that is what we are trying to get at here. What does it look like to worship God in spirit and in truth? Not like, what does it look like to create that space where it is just truly intimacy with God? And that is so crucial. I could say way too much here, so I'm going to cut myself off there and get into it.
Well, it is well said.
Thank you.
And I usually start this whole lesson by telling the story of Bill. Bill was a mentor of mine years and years ago. I was this young, probably I was in my young 20s. I mean, what did I know? Bill was this, he was really good at just being spiritually present. Bill kind of reminded me of Josh. Josh reminds me of Bill, like a little bit more contemplative at heart. He had been a global missionary, international missionary. He just had a different way. He wasn't all wound up in the American story of progress and production. He was trying to teach me this spiritual wisdom. And I was too young. I was too busy. I was too naive. I'm going to go conquer everything. And I remember Bill, he was trying to teach me this, and he kept trying to give me books. I just wasn't interested. And I remember him coming to me one day and saying, Marty, I got a challenge for you. I was like, okay, I like challenges. And I think Bill knew this. I think this whole thing was a setup. I'm pretty confident this whole thing was a setup.
Definitely.
He said, I have a challenge for you. I said, I like challenges. He started talking. He's like, you know what? You couldn't do it. And I'm like, oh no. We're gonna talk about this. What's your challenge? And he's like, no. When I first thought of it, I thought it was a really good idea. But the more I think about it now that I'm standing in front of you, I just don't, it's really not for you. I don't think you could do it. And I'm like, listen, I could do it. Tell me. And he's like, no. And by the time he was done, I was like, I will do whatever. I don't care what it is, Bill, whatever you say, I'm going to do it. And he's like, all right, I'll tell you. Whatever it is, you say you're going to do it. Here's the deal. I want you to take a Bible and a sack lunch. And I lived in Nampa, Idaho, and I lived out by a lake. And he said, I want you to take a Bible and a sack lunch, and I want you to go out to the lake, and I want you to sit there for 8 hours. And I don't want you to open the Bible unless God tells you to open the Bible. I don't want you to do anything. Eat lunch when it's lunchtime. Just have a Bible in case you need it. I just want you to go sit by the lake for 8 hours. And I was like, okay, what do you want me to do? He's like, I just want you to go sit by the lake for 8 hours. And I was like, what? Like, I'm busy. Like, I got things to do. And he's like, I know. I told you you couldn't do it. And I was like, all right. So I grabbed my sack lunch, and I just had a spite. And I had my Bible, and I went out and sat by that lake for 8 hours. And it was an experience that absolutely changed my life. I can remember sitting there. And for almost the entire morning, almost all the way up to lunchtime, I remember, like, my mind was just so busy. Like, it took about 3 hours for my mind to just slow down and finally turn off. And then I felt like all of a sudden I was sitting more in the presence of God, this intimacy that Josh just talked about. I had my lunch. After I had my lunch, I had this startling, it just was this life changing, and I couldn't get enough. I went back to Bill, and I was like, I don't know what that was, but I need more of that. And Bill just started handing me books and contemplative practices, and he was teaching me spiritual practices, but he had to get me to be ready for it, because I would have never been ready for it. And then Bill taught me how to create space for God in my life. And at the time, Bill had the job that I have now. Bill was the president of Impact Campus Ministries. That's what I do now. And what Bill was really trying to live out was he was trying to live out our definition of success. And I love this. I love our definition of success. I'm going to read it. If this sounds a commercial for Impact Campus Ministries, it's because it is. BEMA is a ministry of Impact Campus Ministries. It was started as a ministry to work with college students. We're trying to convince college students of what I'm about ready to tell you, what I'm about ready to read to you. Like, we're trying to convince them of this, like, with all of our heart. I'm trying to convince you, dear listener, of what I'm about ready to read. This is the goodness right here, okay? Success is developing intimacy with God and community with each other through a living relationship with Jesus. We believe an individual who is developing intimacy with God in the context of Christian community will make an impact for the kingdom of God. A team of individuals that is making an impact for the kingdom of God will have a fruitful ministry. Though we do not aim for making an impact and we do not aim for fruitful ministry, we recognize that these two things will supernaturally occur when individuals develop intimacy with God in Christian community. Ministry is the product of our love for God, an expression of a heart devoted to God. We must not allow ministry for God to crowd intimacy with God out of our lives. Whew, that's a big statement. Mm-hmm. We cannot control making an impact or fruitful ministry, but we have absolute control over developing intimacy with God and being devoted to one another. For us at Impact Campus Ministries, success is developing intimacy with God, because then God will bear the fruit. And we spend most of our time in our world trying to figure out how to do the fruit bearing, but that's simply not our job. The thing we can control is creating a space and growing in that intimacy with God. Josh, anything you'd have to say about our sauce, our definition of success?
In all reality, it is probably why I am working in this ministry, why I signed up. And I mean, man, honestly, in a big way, this reminds me of the last episode I was on about empire and shalom, and how much, in a very practical sense, this really put me face to face with that. Because when we look at how we define success, and it not being, hey, how many students am I discipling? Like, how many hours have I been putting flyers up on campus and programming big events? And how many baptisms did I get? How many kids are going to church now because of me? Like, not like any of those things are bad, but just like, that's not how we measure that success. And what's been so powerful in working in an organization where that's not just like what is said, that is like what is practiced, which is the miracle of it. What's crazy is that, just like we talked about in the last episode I was on, it really illuminated the aspects of empire, of feeling the need to produce that, it wasn't coming from, anyone else but my own heart and the parts of my heart that aren't able to slow down and be in God's presence and listen to what that voice is always telling us. And so that has been, I love our sauce. I think it is probably one of the most powerful things that Impact has going for it. Probably the most, if I'm being honest.
Agreed.
And what I love about it is that it separates our own culture's like drive for time and like the chart going up and this rapid exponential growth all the time. Like, we're in a couple of episodes, we're going to talk about what life was like in the desert. And that was 40 years. Like, our timing is not God's timing. And so it's like, oh, we've got to have the fruit, and we've got to have this much. And then next year we're going to have double that. And then the year after that, we're going to double, and we're just going to go and be bigger. And that's not how God's kingdom works. So taking that definition, setting that part of it aside, and letting God do things in his timing, as long as we're faithful to create the space, then God does the other stuff whenever he deems it right.
Yep.
Oh, that brings up the other part too, because a lot, the intimacy with God is crucial, but In there, we also touch on in community with others, in Christian community, in spiritual community.
Yeah.
And I cannot tell you how like the way it affects community to sit in a room with a bunch of ministers and we talk about the students we have and what our numbers are, and to see that have no bearing on who is respected, on whose voice is weighted. Like there is no distinction there because we just don't measure it. We aren't keeping, well, not that we don't keep track of these things. Like we do know how many students we're reaching, but like that is never the point. And seeing how that affects the community aspect of it is like that then reinforces the kind of intimacy we're building with God. And those two things together, like that is, that's good stuff.
Yes. And so that is the idea. We read in this story about God's people making a space, the tabernacle, and then God fills it. And so the question of our episode, will we do the same? Will we make space, not a physical tabernacle space, but will we make a different kind of space that God can fill? And so we're going to talk about practices for the rest of this episode. A bunch of spiritual practices, a bunch of spiritual disciplines, a bunch of spiritual expressions that help us create space for God in our life. And we're just going to go over those. The two we're familiar with is Bible study and prayer. Like I can remember growing up in the evangelical fundamentalist world, and boy, Bible study and prayer, Bible study and prayer. Are you praying and reading your Bible? Are you praying? And those are two great ideas, by the way.
Yeah.
And there are many different ways to do Bible study and prayer and even other things. And so we want to talk about those two things and more. The goal today, we're going to talk about 15, 18 different practices. The goal is not to do this whole list. That'd be crazy. Like the goal is not to try to be doing this entire list all the time. The goal is to have a few things, have a few disciplines, have a few practices at any given time that are helping you create space for a season. I would assume that some of the things you'll do will be things that are like, they come easily. They bring life, like you gravitate towards them. I always try to have one or two disciplines I'm working on that are a challenge, like they're a stretch for me. They don't come naturally because I feel like there is both life in the life-giving ones and growth in the ones that are a challenge. So that's a recommendation that I give you. But let's start with prayer. Feels like a good place to start. We've got some different prayer practices. I'm going to list 4 here. Prayer journaling. I hate prayer journaling, if I'm honest. Number 1, I just struggle with prayer. My mom was a prayer warrior. She got up, like literally, I cannot think of a day if we weren't on vacation. Like I cannot think of a single day in my life in 18 years of living at home where my mom was not up. I believe it was like 4:45, 5:45 in the morning. And she got up and she was praying for 30 minutes every single morning. We have people in our life. I got a good friend. We all have a good friend named Jim. Jim is a great person committed to the value and the practice of prayer. People call them prayer warriors. I've discovered that prayer warriors usually hate the term prayer warriors. So we won't call them that, but we know what we mean when we say that. People that are deeply devoted. I have always struggled with the practices of prayer. It just doesn't come naturally for me. My brain gets in the way. My theology gets in the way, clogs up the machinery. But I have always tried to be praying. Like I've always tried to have a discipline of prayer in my life. One of them is prayer journaling. I hate prayer journaling, but somebody just referred to it. Actually, it was Reed Dent's wife the other day. We were at an event and we were talking about some of these things. And Leanne, Reed's wife, came up and she said, prayer journaling is like flossing. It's that thing that we're always supposed to do. Like we just need to do it, but it's the thing that nobody wants to do. And we're always like, ugh. But prayer journaling is that thing. And the reason why it's so powerful is I can look back over the course of a season, years, and I can see the things that God has done. I can see the ways that I've grown. I can see when you're in the moment, you often lose sight of the fact. You feel like, is God even doing? Am I even growing? Prayer journaling will prove to you that you are, in fact, hearing from God, being transformed. Another practice that is there is sometimes called the daily office, but it's called fixed hour prayer. Fixed hour prayer. So when we get together for our staff conferences at Impact, one of the first things we do on day 1 is we have everybody set their alarms on their phones for 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. And whenever those alarms go off, no matter what we're doing, we just stop and we pray. And it doesn't have to be 10 minutes of prayer. It can just be reciting the Lord's Prayer. But that alarm goes off, and no matter what I'm doing, I stop and I pray. And you would be amazed at how many times you can be in the middle of a conversation, you can be in the middle of a project, and that alarm goes off, and it just brings like a flood of perspective. Just stopping for 2 seconds and being like, oh yeah, God. Like, it can be a powerful, powerful practice. Contemplative. Notice these practices are not just go over in a corner, bow your head, fold your hands, close your eyes, and talk to God. That's great. Do that. But these are other ways of creating space if you struggle with some of those other things. Contemplative prayer. Contemplative prayer. Things like the centering prayer, which a lot of people know, the famous prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. You can just say that as a centering practice over and over again. Just say it. About 30 times in, that prayer will start talking back to you. Like, it'll go from being something that you're fixed on to being something you're not paying attention to all of a sudden it starts to talk back to you. Like, Lord Jesus Christ. What is the Lordship of Jesus Christ? Son of God. Son of God, who was the person of Jesus Christ? Have mercy on me. I need mercy. Like, the whole prayer starts to do a work just by saying the same line over and letting it sit, over, letting it sit, over and letting it sit. And then finally, the idea of praying the text. This would be a very Jewish concept. They would say God's already spoken. The Psalms would be a great example of how you pray the text. Lectio Divina might be if you're from the high church traditions, it might be a more Christian expression of praying the text. How do I take a passage, pray it out loud, let that passage do a work? How can I pray through a passage? Just take every line and use it as a prayer. You can find Psalms that feel like they're God talking to you in a prayerful way. You can talk back. Like, you can do all kinds of things simply by leveraging the text as a prayer method. So, Josh, thoughts you have on the prayer practices?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not big on prayer journaling, but yeah, every time we do like fixed hour prayer, that's a super cool practice. And for a number of years, I did some of the Jewish prayer practices where they have different times of day. You know, you say prayer in the morning, in the evening, at night. And I would say the Shema morning and night, and talk about like the text coming back to you. I did, I was very much doing a very Josh style thing at that time in my life. So I was like memorizing the Shema in Hebrew and would pray it really slow. So like my brain was trying to like translate it as I was reading it. And yeah, there were times where, it was just words I was saying very sleepily because I was getting ready for bed and I'm like, oh shoot, I haven't said Shema yet. But it was incredible to see not just like the text starting to speak back, the words taking on new depth and new meaning, but how often that happened. Like, there were always new levels and new ways for that text to speak. And there's a lot of ways to pray too. Like, the one recent one that I've encountered is ninefold prayer, which is where you take the same prayer and you pray it for you start with a group of individuals. It's called the ninefold prayer because you say the prayer 9 times, and you pick one prayer and you say the same prayer for someone you like, someone you love, someone you feel neutral towards, and someone that you suffer even to think about. And then you do the same thing with groups, a group that you like, a group that you love. And there's something really powerful about, in the moment, seeing what the Holy Spirit puts on your heart. So you do those 2 groups of 4, and then finally you say the same prayer for yourself. And it is like, in some ways a very direct, pray for your enemies, but having to use the same, a lot of times in the church, being like, oh, we need to pray for our enemies. We would specifically pray for our enemies. And it wouldn't be the same things that we would pray for ourselves or for, our families oftentimes. And thinking through, what is a prayer that I can genuinely pray for all these different people and organizations that God puts on me, that it stretches you. And that I love what you said. We need to have life-giving practices, and it's also important to have some stretching ones.
Brent, what has your experience been with prayer practice?
Well, I had a brief diversion in childhood, about 3rd through 6th grades, where I was in the Catholic Church and did a lot of this and did not know how to appreciate it. So I look back on that time and think like, wow, that is, and it did. I mean, as much as a kid of that age can understand things, my understanding was limited. My confessions were obvious, or were oftentimes just like, hey, I was fighting with my sister again this week. But yeah, like those things, when you actually do that with intentionality, it does do a work on you.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe if you're listening to this, maybe there's something in that section. Just take one of those. Don't take 2, don't take 3. Just take, what's one practice that maybe for the next 90 days you could imagine toying with? Okay, now for my favorite section. This is my favorite. The practices of presence. This is the stuff that like brings me life. When I talk about ones that come easy, whoo, baby, these are it. I got 3 of them for you, okay? The practice of solitude, Sabbath, and silence. And this is kind of all-encompassing. There's the weekly practice of Sabbath, but just the concept of solitude, stopping, being silent, that whole thing. Here's a definition I have written down from years ago. Creating space to become more aware of the love, grace, and companionship of God than the companionship demands and duties of life and others. Creating space to become more aware of the love, grace, and companionship of God than the companionship demands and duties of life and others. This was that time out by the lake. That time that Bill invited me into was a time of solitude, Sabbath, and silence. And what I love about these for me, it's a large chunk of time because it takes me, and I know it's crazy for people to think about this, it takes me, I don't know about you, hours to empty my mind. So I just have to sit in solitude, silence. I have to go find a mountain somewhere, climb to the top, and just be there and just stare at the horizon, eat a lunch. Takes me a long time for my brain to finally slow down. I want some, and I've read this in a book too, but I first heard it from a monk friend of mine at a monastery. Wasn't quite a spiritual director, but was just somebody I would see when I would visit the monastery. And he once explained, it's almost like a handful of balloons. You come to your Sabbath time with a handful of balloons, and you sit there and you're just slowly opening your grip so that the balloons one by one just kind of start to drift away until eventually you're left holding just one balloon, and it's the one balloon that God wanted you to see. And I just loved that picture. I can remember that day. I remember the day that Bill told me to sit out by the lake. I bet it was 5 hours into my day. I was past lunch. It was in the afternoon. And I remember finally my brain had settled down. I was finally just kind of sitting in the presence of God. And it was like clear as day, crystal clear realization out of nowhere, I have been neglecting my wife. Like it was just this clear message. Like for months, I just haven't been thinking about her, taking care of her. Like I've been living life with her, doing all but I had not, like my presence was not thinking about taking, and I remember just doing some things that weekend. I don't think I would have heard that voice. Was that voice there the whole time? I think so. I would not have heard what the Spirit was trying to nudge me and tell me had I not made those spaces to simply hear from the Spirit of God. So Sabbath, solitude, and silence. And I think this practice of Sabbath is a huge deal in our culture. There's actually a video out there that I absolutely love by Walter Brueggemann. It's found at a Work of the People distribution site, but he does this video teaching on Sabbath being the perfect counter to a culture that is bent on the military industrial complex, the consumption, and Sabbath is this thing that runs counter to that. And if you ever, one of the things we used to do with our students is we would watch that video together in our discussion groups. And if you had the time and the ability, I can't remember if it sits behind a paywall or not, but if you can find it, we'll put a link in the show notes and have a chance to watch that. I think it would be well worth your time. Love that teaching.
It is not paywalled.
Splendid. Exactly what we wanted to hear.
At least not at the time of recording.
There we go. Okay, so practicing the presence of God is our next practice. That feels like a weird practicing the presence of God. What is this? Well, there's a small little book. It's a classic. It is literally a Christian classic written by an old monk by the name of, I don't know how old he was when he wrote it. I picture an old monk, but his name was Brother Lawrence. And he wrote this small, it's bigger than a pamphlet, but it's smaller than a book. And it's this small little thing called Practicing the Presence of God. And it was just him talking about this practice is learning how to become aware of God as a constant companion, staying in constant contact with God. This idea of praying without ceasing that we'll often talk about with Paul. He'll talk about putting little reminders. I picture a rubber band on my wrist or a string around my finger, that kind of a concept of here are these things that just remind me, God's with me. God's with me. Doing the dishes, God's with me. Driving to the grocery store, God's with me. Like everything that I do, playing video games, God's with me. Like practicing the presence of God. And it can be a beautiful little practice. Finally, practice of presence is the practice of simplicity. This is a great definition. I love this. Resisting the pull of acquisition, complexity, consumption, and hurry through the intentional pursuit of a simple life. Resisting the pull of acquisition, complexity, consumption, and hurry through the intentional pursuit of a simple life. I think there was I had a good friend, Chris McNaught. I don't know if we recommended this last time we did this episode. I think we did, Brent. But what was the name of that book? Was it in our notes from last time?
I don't have it.
Oh, shoot. We talked about it at some point on our journey. The Simplistic Way. Chris McNaught, McNaught. He was a good friend of mine from the small town I grew up in. And he wrote a book on simplicity.
Ah, here it is. We originally talked about it in episode 45. It's called Less is More Than Enough.
Less is more than enough. There you go. And the whole idea of minimalism, and that's been a trend and that's been a fad. I'm not talking about a trend and a fad. I'm talking about a spiritual practice. Just the idea of, I will do this sometimes in my life where I'll just notice there's a part of my life that's just super cluttered. It's just busy. It's just got a lot of stuff. And I'm going to go strip down that part of my life. I'm going to get only the stuff I need. I'm going to get rid of some things, send a bunch of material things to Goodwill. I'm going to slow down in that area. I'm going to quit some subscriptions, like whatever it is that I need to do. I'm going to simplify so that I can just get down to the good stuff and just sit with the good stuff. The practice of simplicity. Sometimes our lives get so cluttered, physically, spiritually. Josh, what kind of things about the practices of presence would you say?
Well, I mean, these are also absolutely my favorites. A lot of these intersect. Like Sabbath is by far the longest running spiritual practice I've done consistently. But one thing I love about these practices is that they like all co-inform each other. So like you were just talking about simplicity. And one of the things, especially, from the Jewish perspective of Sabbathing, right, resting, observing a Shabbat, is that you pull out the best wine on Shabbat. You eat nicer food. You wear your nice clothes. You get comfy. You enjoy the fine things that remind us that creation is good. But sometimes I took that a little too far, and I would be like, oh yeah, for our Shabbat dinner, to welcome in Shabbat, I'm going to, make a 18-course meal, and then going into Shabbat, I'd be sitting down. It would be, 3 hours later than I thought we would be eating. I'd be sweaty. I'd be stressed out. And like, that is something where I was like, okay, this stopped feeling like Shabbat at some point. And so when we, are planning for our next Shabbat, it's like, okay, it needs to be nice, but also simple. What can we make that would be nice, but also really simple? And that's something that I would add in here, kind of in parallel to what Marty's talked about, like even just your exhortation to like pick one thing from this list. Don't try to juggle more than one thing at a time. And especially if you are someone out there who has strong spiritual practices, another way of doing that is like modifying your spiritual practice in some way. Maybe you have a prayer practice. You can add a little bit of silence before you start praying. Just be like, oh, maybe I'm a little rushed in my prayers, and I can take a minute and take a deep breath. And now my prayer has another level of rest and awareness and being in God's presence. Like, that's one of the things I love, is like this is very, my style of this is very different from Marty. I like when practices kind of bleed into each other. And that's one of my favorite parts about it, is that practices can deepen other practices. And I think especially when it comes to these presence style practices that you're talking about, it's what is more profound than God's presence? It's God's presence. Like, and the more you can see that and tangibly in your bones feel that you are in the presence of the living God, like, you will hear things more powerful than anything this podcast will ever put into your ears. Like, that is the stuff.
Not hard to believe, but yeah, that you'll hear better, more profound things than you will in this podcast. You are absolutely right. You are absolutely right.
Yeah. And just all of these things, like when I think prayer journaling, it's like, oh my gosh, do I have to write out like 5 pages of everything okay, don't start there.
Right.
Like, just make like a 5-item bullet point list of the things that you're praying about. Just start there.
Right.
And as you get into that habit, then you can expand that if that's something that's really working for you. But like, I mean, we're about to talk about like scripture memorization. After the 2016 trip to Israel and Turkey, I came home and I was like, I'm going to memorize Torah. It's like, that was too big of a bite.
Yep.
And I didn't end up doing anything. So it's like, don't make it unachievable. Like, keep it simple. Make it so that it is actually restful. Give yourself the space to quiet your mind, and don't fill it with all the like if you're quieting your mind only to fill it with like the pressures of doing everything that we're talking about on this episode, that's not really the point of what we're doing.
Well said. Great point. All right, let's keep going. The next discipline I have on my list, the next practice, is the practice of generosity. I love to go through seasons of generosity. I don't like to live here because then it doesn't mean anything, but I love to go through a few months where my goal is to simply say yes. My goal is to always have cash on hand so I can give it to those people that might be asking for cash. And I don't sit there and I don't ask the question like, well, what are they going to use it for? It's not about righting all the wrongs of homelessness, or it's about me practicing, creating space for God to work in the practice of generosity. I love to go through seasons where I tip extra big because it's a practice. I'm creating a space. It's not about the waiter or the waitress. It's not about those things. It's about God working in my own life and my own heart. I'm not trying to make a show of it. I'm not, by the way, I don't know if Christians know this. There's this thing called tipping. We do it. A lot of people do it at the end of meals. It's an opportunity. I'm joking, but Christians are not known. Brent, what's the reputation for working on Sundays?
You don't want to do it.
You don't want to be a waiter or a waitress on a Sunday because the church people come by and they're the worst customers. They're the hardest to please and they're the worst tippers. I think it's still to this day, years later, I'm saying it again on our next episode because it is one of the most tragic, craziest things that a group of people that follow Jesus would be known for that and not the opposite is, I just find it to be like an absolute travesty. So nevertheless, just the practice, see it as a practice. Don't see it as a transaction. See it as a practice where you create space for God. And a lot of times people will put, along with generosity, they'll put the practice of secrecy, which means like I do something and it's anonymous. Like people don't even know. My left hand doesn't know my right. I'm not doing like nobody gets to see, nobody gets credit for it. And it does, that creates space in my heart for God to work.
And all of our international listeners are like, tipping is an insane practice anyway. Why is anybody
right?
Like
sure.
You wouldn't have to have this reputation if you didn't have such a crazy system. So I don't know what that is in your culture.
Yep.
But whatever practice you can come up with for generosity, like it's not going to be tipping necessarily, but find a way to be generous.
Totally. 100%. Here's one of my least favorite practices, the practice of submission. Don't make this weird or abusive or twisted. For me, the practice of submission I have been able to lean into and use when I've been in a season of my life where I really can't control my circumstances. And I'm not talking about moral or ethical things. I'm not talking about a boss that wants you to do something that's wrong or unjust or, I'm talking about they just see their personality is not my personality. Our values don't necessarily perfectly align, or whatever it might be. But I find myself in a situation that's kind of out of my control, and I get to lean into for a year and a half. I get to lean into a season of the practice of submission, just leaning into it, letting them lead, letting them call the shots, knowing that it's not going to ring my bell all the time, knowing that I'm probably going to see the world a little differently, but I'm going to sit. One of my greatest seasons of being shaped and formed that God used to change and transform me was a season of submission, where I was under the leadership of somebody that, golly, they just grinded my gears. They weren't very Bema-y. They had this value system but they taught me more in that year and a half about leadership than any other season of my life. Deeply, deeply shaped me because I was willing to create a space, and then God ended up filling it. And I knew it in the moment, but I really came to appreciate it much later in my life. Very thankful for that season. So sometimes, and again, I'm not saying put yourself in an abusive relationship, that kind of submission. That's not at all what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the opportunity to say, this isn't my preferred mode, but you know what? I'm going to turn this into a spiritual space. And God will fill that. God will do something really cool. There's the practice of gratitude. The Jews are known for saying, I believe I read somewhere that one tradition said you were supposed to try to say 70 blessings a day. A blessing for a Jew is an expression of gratitude. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, for whatever it is that I'm. And I know that sounds doable. Try to do that. The highest I've ever gotten, I think, is into my 40s. Like, I don't think I've ever been able to say 50 thank you, like 50 blessings a day. Like, if I were to just to sit down and just try to write out 50 statements, I could do it. 70 statements, I could do it. But I mean, like, within my day, to try to be cognizant enough that I'm uttering blessings.
Yeah.
I used to do this on Thanksgiving. I would make this like a Thanksgiving. I felt like it was a good day to do it. I had the day off. And I used to I would actually tweet on Twitter. I'd tweet my blessings. I think the most I ever did was like 22. This is hard. It's hard to be like, Josh, you're nodding your head and stuff over there. What's been your practice of gratitude?
I also undertook the 70 blessings challenge. And I'm not as good at keeping track of things as you are. So I don't even know what number I got to, but it was clear. I was at noon and I would like, man, I don't even think I've said a dozen blessings. Like, dang, it is a hefty goal, but I mean, gratitude's a weird one for me because I hear it so much in just like broadly in the culture that sometimes it's one that I'm like a little bit desensitized to. I know you've talked about before Ann Voskamp's book, 1,000 Gifts, or is it 1,000 Gifts, 10,000 Gifts?
It's either 1,000 gifts or 1,000 gifts. I can't remember which.
Oh, okay. I think my brain upgraded it, and I just think about 10,000 gifts all the time. But that was a really powerful book for me, and it tapped into some stuff that God was already doing in my heart. And I think what I like about gratitude, it kind of reminds me of what we've talked about before with Sabbath and what we're really doing, in that it's like you're acknowledging the goodness in creation that is there. You're not just you're not just being like, oh, you better not take for granted, you have plenty of food and there's starving kids somewhere else. Like it isn't that kind of punitive, like you better be thankful. It's more like, what are the moments of genuine appreciation that just rise up in daily life? And I think that's what makes the 70 so challenging, is that is kind of a mirror that says, how aware are you actually throughout the day of how good creation is, of how nice that is. And so for a while, and it's funny you talk about submission, there was a period in my life, I won't talk about it here, but in the very recent past, what you talked about with the submission thing about time in your life where you don't really control a lot of the things going on around you. I had one heck of a season like that, and the gratitude part was huge. And a lot of it was, it again, kind of blended with this submission of like, okay, I'm not worried about these things I can't control, so I'm just going to be present. And then it would be like, just walking around, it would be like, I'm really thankful for how solid the ground under my feet is. Like and just taking a breath and acknowledging it. And I know for me, like what made that practice really work was when I wasn't trying to do cause in my head, I wanted to do it like, the rabbis and say, oh, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. And then in the moment I'm like, oh, how would I say that in Hebrew? I would try and like you said earlier, Brent, like taking way too big of a bite. And in that season, because I was so humbled and broken down and just in a submissive posture, all I could do was just like take a breath and internally recognize like, this is good. I'm glad I can hear that bird singing. I'm glad, I like the noise of the cars going by, like finding it in the mundanity of life, which is a lot of what Anne talks about in her book. Like that to me can be really powerful.
Yes. Absolutely.
The book is 1,000 Gifts, and it will be in the show notes, of course. So you don't even have to remember what it's called. It'll be there for you.
Fantastic. All right. We got meditating and memorizing. First of all, there's meditating on the text. There's just taking a passage of the Bible and just like having a memory verse type of an idea and just mulling over it all day, all week, just reciting it, just saying it over and over again, letting it do its work. I just recently had, we call them personal retreat days. Just had one yesterday, actually. And one of the things I did was I had a passage, and I just throughout the day just kept saying it, thinking about this passage. It's a passage out of John, and just kept thinking about it. That's meditation. Going along with it is the idea of memorization. We're going to talk about that a lot in Bema because we're really big fans. By the time you're done with this journey, we're really big fans of putting the text inside of us, getting the text inside of us, having God's words in our hearts, on our lips, memorized in text. You heard Brent say a moment ago, the coming back from one of our trips and just a commitment to wanting to memorize. So we'll talk more about that. We won't spend a whole lot of time here, but I will say this. The most helpful thing that I ever heard was when Ray Vanderlaan told me, quit trying to stack. And I was like, what are you talking about? Stacking? What? He said, when people memorize, they keep thinking that they have to stack their memorization. So when I say memorize the Gospel of John, you think that you're going to memorize John 1, and then the next week you're going to memorize John 2, and you're going to stack it. And then you're going to recite John 1 and John 2, and then you're going to stack John 3, and you're going to memorize John 1, 2, and 3, and you're going to stack John 4. So quit trying to stack it. Just memorize your weekly portion. Just memorize that, and then put it aside. And Ray said, you've done your work. If God wants you to remember it, that's the Holy Spirit's job. But you've done your work by putting it inside of you. Now move on to the next. And so I have every week a weekly portion that I'm memorizing. And I don't stack it. I don't add it to last week's portion. That was last week's portion. I memorized it, recited it. At the end of the week, I put it aside. Then I did my next week's portion. And I have now plowed through almost all the Gospels. I'm just about ready to finish up the Gospels. Almost all of Torah. Bunch of different prophets and a handful of books here and there. And I'm making some serious headway. And you really do retain quite a bit. And I just have loved that admonition to not try to stack and have to keep memorizing everything for all of eternity. But Brent, you talked about memorizing earlier. What were some of your experiences? What have been your experiences with memorization?
I mean, that's maybe the earliest spiritual practice I remember because I went to a Christian school, K through 3, and then again later for a few years. But first grade, I remember going out in the hallway and reciting memory verses to, I don't know if it was the teacher. I can't imagine leaving 25 kids in a room alone while the teacher's in the hallway. I don't know how it worked, but I remember very vividly going out in the hallway every week and having a passage that I memorized. So that's been a part of my life for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a practice that won't return void. So we'll talk about that more throughout our study. But coming down the home stretch here, spiritual direction is another way to create space for God. That's a spiritual director, spiritual direction. Spiritual directors are like spiritual counselors in the same way that you might go to a counselor or a therapist for spiritual directors have also received training. To my spiritual director, I have one right now, and he talks about it as spiritual companionship. He says, I'm just here on the journey with you. We have a formal relationship. Usually you pay them for their time, just like a counselor. And we have an intentional relationship together. He's just along for the ride, but he's trained to know how to listen with a spiritual ear, to try to listen for what God is up to. Like they've been given a special set of tools to be able to go, what is God up to in this guy's life? And let's go find it together. And so I have really enjoyed. I've had now a few different spiritual directors throughout my life. I've also had counselors and therapists at different seasons of my life. Sometimes I've had them at the same time, but I'll go through one season or another. And the practice of spiritual direction has been really enriching for a lot of reasons. But it's another way that you can create space. You can create a relationship. You can create a relational space. And God speaks and works through these individuals. So big fan of spiritual direction. I've got one last little group. I got 3 more disciplines, practices that I lump under what I call seasonal practices. Seasonal practices. So we'll have to see we'll close with these last 3. First of all, there's fasting and self-denial. We all knew this one was coming. But fasting and self-denial. I have engaged in a lot of great fasting experiences. My mentors, Bill, I talked about him earlier. Bill was loved to fast in all kinds of different ways. I saw Bill model this. I saw him, I imitated. I was able to imitate Bill in a lot of ways with his practices of fasting. Food fasting. Sometimes it'll be media fasting. You can fast from a lot of things, and you can fast in a lot of different ways. I've done a couple really long food fasts to be, just for context. I did 2. I did a 40-day fast, and then I fasted for the whole month of February, so 28 days one time. And that was a food fast. I was very intentional. I don't do I'm not looking for a supernatural miracle fast. I plan out my I plan out my getting out of my fast. I try to get all my nutrients. I drink a lot of V8 Fusion. I even did smoothies. I had a bunch of people tell me I was cheating when I did smoothies. Okay, that's fine, I guess. When you're 20 days in on a fast, I'll let you critique my fast. But those were always fun times. Like they were all... Here's the thing. I was always raised, Josh, I don't know what your experience was. I was always raised like fasting. It was almost like this act of piety. Like I don't eat, and apparently I'm supposed to pray during my meal times or something. Usually I'm told that I fast when I'm looking for answers. It becomes pretty transactional. And yet what I discovered, there's actually a book out there, Finding Our Way Again by Brian McLaren. Finding Our Way Again by Brian McLaren. And it was a book that really changed my relationship to fasting. Here's what's interesting about fasting. We act like it's going to draw us closer to God, but if you've ever fasted, like truly fasted, you know that you couldn't feel like further away from God. Like you feel like all I want is food. All I want, like I'm supposed to be praying, but all I can think about is like Krispy Kremes. And like that's the experience of, and Brian McLaren's like, that's what the fast is supposed to do. Fasting is supposed to, it doesn't make you more spiritual. It actually breaks you down and makes you feel less spiritual. There's another book by Scott McKnight with the ingenious title, Fasting. And he talks about fasting in a way that I think is just really helpful as well. He says, fasting is not something we do for something. It's something we do in response to something. So sometimes we feel like I'm going to fast for an answer. And he looks at the biblical practices and he says, people weren't fasting for an answer. People weren't fasting so that God would do something. People were fasting because something had happened and they needed to humble themselves. They were in mourning. They were in grief. They were looking for humility. They were breaking down their pride. And fasting enabled them to break down that pride, get connected to their own humanity, get connected to their own, their own broken downness. And that's what fasting does. And then fasting puts us in a place where, kind of like Sabbath, kind of like when you shut off all the noise, you can finally hear God. Fasting enables us to break ourselves down to like our humble form so that in our humility, we're more ready to see and receive and hear the things that God is up to. So fasting as a response to something both the times I did those large fasts in my life, I fasted because I felt like this is a season I need to kind of I need to be broken down a little bit. I need to have some humility. That's why I was doing it. I don't fast on a regular basis. I don't fast every Tuesday. I kind of stay away from that approach to fasting. Fasting is something that I have in my pocket. I'm ready to pull a fast out when I need it. And that's been some of my experiences with fasting. Josh, have you had any experiences with fasting?
Yeah, Marty, I have had some pretty powerful experiences with fasting, and it hews pretty close to what you talked about, it strips away. It isn't like, a little Mario like mushroom boost where you're just more spiritual. And I think it for me, like I unfortunately had some instances where I was probably fasting too hard. Like I was doing a full like no food, no water fast, like while I was working construction, and almost passed out when I was at the top of a ladder. And I'm like, you know what, this is a bad idea. I need to just go eat something right now. And I think that is something important I want to throw in here, which, I mean, I think we've already established this to some degree, but these practices are supposed to draw us closer to God. They aren't like here to be ways to be like spiritually hardcore or next level. Like there is a whole aesthetic to being a spiritual person that is really prevalent in the culture. And so one of the ways I think that is good to keep ourselves humble and not mixing that into our spiritual practices and time with God is to, not try and get around our own humanity and our own, the humility that comes with that. On the other hand, though, those moments of being really deeply humbled provided a lot of clarity. I once had a spiritual mentor who talked about it like it's kind of just a spiritual shower. Like you are just getting stuff out and off of you. And yeah, so that's been really powerful. Although I have to say nowadays, I don't really do this more because fasting for me now is something I usually have to do for medical reasons.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it just doesn't have the same symbolic heft. Yep. And so like now when, I observe the Jewish holidays that are the Torah holidays, the holidays that God talks about in the Torah. And so I've had to be creative on like Yom Kippur, this season of fasting, and like, how do I get to that same place emotionally, but in a different way that's better for my health and
totally
and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. Okay, so on the flip side of fasting, there's feasting, and that is a spiritual practice. It really is. It's so much a spiritual practice. We'll talk about it in Leviticus as a major part of what God's wanting from his people. If self-restraint is creating space for God, so is the proper level of, I'll call it divine indulgence, knowing when to say yes to the party, knowing when to buy the extra nice bottle of wine, when to say yes to the filet mignon. And some of us are really good at that, too good at that. Some of us are really bad at it because we've been taught that any level of self-indulgence is bad and sinful. And what that means is we're being robbed from a particular practice, a particular space that God wants to fill and teach us. So we need to know, if we were to party all the time, the party would lose its power. Mm-hmm. But if we party as the appropriate kind of practice and rhythm, the party has the ability to speak. And I was never taught that. But we'll talk about that more in our study of Leviticus. But that's the practice of feasting, to say yes to the party. And then we have the church calendar, and the church calendar takes us through, and by that I mean the Christian church calendar, seasons of Advent, seasons of Lent. These are seasonal practices that I've come to embrace over the last decade of my life because of their ability to do a work in me. The work of Advent, to take us to really lean into the winter that is around us as everything is dying and the days are getting shorter and the temperatures are getting colder and I'm getting drawn inside around the fire. Like, to spiritually parallel that. What are the things inside of me that are dying? What are the things inside of me that I need to get rid of? Am I allowing the calendar to bring me down? Because it's in the depths, like it's in the darkness that the Christ child is born. Like, that's the story of Advent. It's not the happy, Christmas music, and I'm not saying those things are bad, but the, sleigh bells ringling and Jack Frost nipping at your nose, like that's not necessarily what the spiritual practice of the church calendar is trying to teach us. On the flip side, Lent starts with death, Ash Wednesday, and then takes us towards resurrection. Like these seasons in the church calendar. And again, Lent is one of those seasons where fasting's incorporated, or can be. These are all opportunities that come around every single year on the calendar that have the ability to do it's ways to create space for God, and then God shows up and fills these spaces. So I know we've been going long, Brent. I would just close this time by saying the big idea here is not to take all of these practices and try to do them all. It's to find a handful of practices for this next season of your life, and to have, I love what you said earlier, Brent, it's like a balanced meal. Don't overdo it. Don't gorge yourself on mashed potatoes. Don't, like a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here. If you take too much, you sabotage the experience. So you want to take something that's very, very doable so that you get some spiritual practice wins under your belt, and just have a nice balanced meal with a handful of practices and see what God does with that. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, the church calendar was really helpful for me. Like I did all those things in my time in the Catholic Church, and the Lenten season in particular. Every year, it's like, okay, what are you gonna give up for Lent? That was the conversation. Everybody's talking about it.
Yep.
And that was an opportunity to like, okay, last year I did this. I kind of want to challenge myself a little more this year. But then next year it's like, you know what? I bit off a little bit too much. That was tough. Maybe I should do something a little simpler. And you just get a chance to do that year after year. And to that point, you're at the beginning of the podcast. You're in session 1 right now. When you get to session 7, that entire season of the podcast, and it's not that long of a season, but the entire thing is about Sabbath and about spiritual disciplines. All of us go through in detail all of our spiritual practices, so you get a lot more perspectives, a lot more ideas. But we've already given you a lot today. Like, you don't need to jump ahead to session 7. Like, just take this and just implement a few things. Try something for 90 days. If that doesn't really speak to you very much, try a different thing, incorporate different things, slowly grow. And then by the time you get to 7, you can revisit all of that stuff and say, okay, I'm ready for a new challenge. I'm ready to try something different, whatever it is. So just know that that's coming, but we've laid out all this stuff today. That should be enough. There should be something in there that you can try, something that you haven't done before, something that you can challenge yourself. But yeah, just know that conversation, we revisit this just like the church calendar cycles every year. We're going to come back to this from time to time and just reevaluate for ourselves and hopefully to the benefit of you as well.
Yeah, and one last thing that I'd love to do is we got Josh with us today. I mean, Josh is on staff with Impact as our BEMA student minister. Like, his job is to find all the listeners of this podcast that are enrolled in college courses. Like, if you are a college student, an active college student, then Josh's job is to kind of know about your story. And maybe you have another campus ministry you're involved with, but if you need any kind of those, that pastoral guidance, that whatever you want to call that, if you could use a campus minister that you could talk to or reach out to, that's Josh's job. And he actually has something. Josh is pretty passionate about this spiritual practice stuff. That's why I had him on this episode. And Josh, you do something called Olam. Do you just want to give us, before we're done here today, tell us about Olam and what that could be for somebody listening to this.
Yeah. I'll give you the snack size thing, because if you can believe it, I could go a whole nother hour-long episode just talking about Olam. But Olam was, it started as an in-person college ministry back when I was doing that here in Cincinnati. And it was directly inspired, like literally, if you just take us talking about the definition of success, and if you remember this idea of making space, like Olam was just me sticking those two things together and saying, what if we only did this? What if we didn't complicate it with anything else? We just said, hey, we want to build intimacy with God and community, and we want to create a space for students to not just experience spiritual practices. Because a lot of times, even in this conversation we've been having, a lot of this stuff is individual. What are you doing in your spiritual practice? Which is mostly because that's the reality of how our days are structured. But there is something else to experimenting with and working out spiritual practices communally and in a group. And that is something that we are working out in Olam, me and a bunch of other students, and it's great and it's wonderful. And so, yeah, if you're a student and you want to lean into spiritual practices, deepen your spiritual practice, or just talk, learn more, need help with something, please reach out. I have a special email, midrashjosh, midrashjosh @gmail.com. That is where all my Olam stuff goes. And yeah, hit me up, send me an email, and we'll talk. I would love to meet you. And like Marty said, mostly I just want to know your story and help you in whatever way I can.
Well, that is beautiful. We will have all of the links to the resources that we provided in the show notes. You can find all of that at BamaDiscipleship.com, as well as in your podcast app. If you want to get in a group with people, if you want to contact us, you can use the contact page on the website. If you want to make a donation and support the work that we're doing, like Josh is supported by people to do the work that he's doing with college students. We make this podcast through your support. Everything that we do is made possible because of listeners like you who have contributed to our work. So if you want to do that, that's on the website as well. So thanks for joining us on the Bama Podcast this week. We'll talk to you again soon.
Hi, I'm Kyle Nichols, a Bama listener in Princeton, British Columbia, and here's the prayer from episode 24's companion. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, for sending us your Spirit to meet with us in so many sacred ways. We long for you, to be close to you. Let us not live for our desire to check boxes, to do more or grow in number, even in your name. Rather, let us slow down and create space, hold space, and cherish the space with you. We long for you, to be close to you. Teach us to pray, teach us to sit in silence, teach us to meditate, to give and receive, to submit and to serve, to Sabbath and celebrate. We long for you, to be close to you, together. Each day, may we create more space in our humanity and our community for you to fill with your divinity.